Hello, everybody. My name is Oscar Wüstinger. I'm the Austrian ambassador here in Saudi Arabia. It's my particular pleasure to welcome you to this IGF Open Forum, a moment in regulating autonomous weapon systems. I'm very much looking forward to the presentations and hopefully also discussion of our esteemed panelists and participants. So now time, I want to hand over to our moderator, Professor Kleinwächter.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The sound, so we can manage this with the technical people, so I will continue to speak. The ambassador for the Austrian Foreign Ministry, which is Ambassador Syste, he will introduction, and after that we will start panelists which are here. So, Syste, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope you can all hear me. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Vienna. I have the pleasure to kickstart this discussion on autonomous weapon system with a few introductory remarks from an Austrian perspective. Like all innovations, AI applications in the military domain are developing with high speed, holding promises of making tasks faster, easier, or more accessible. At the same time, we have to base any technological innovation firmly on the principle of digital humanism. Therefore, like in the civilian sector, guardrails and limitations are needed in the military sector to ensure human rights-based, human-centered, ethical, and responsible use of AI. However, the establishing of rules and limitations on AI applications is lagging behind in the military sector, even if this sector is confronted with some of the most sensitive issues about decisions over life and death. This is what we want to address today. We focus on the issue of autonomous weapon systems that select and apply force to targets without any further human intervention. These autonomous weapon systems raise profound concerns from a legal, ethical, and security perspective, including meaningful human control to ensure proportionality and distinction of any use, predictability and accountability, the right to life and human dignity, the risk of proliferation, and an autonomy arms race. We will hear more about this during the panel. Valuable discussions have been going on for a decade, particularly in the group of governmental experts in Geneva, as well as the Human Rights Council, with the convergence of views of a broad majority that a legal framework for autonomous weapon systems is necessary, including prohibitions and regulations. The aim is not a total ban of autonomous weapon system, but there should also be a possibility to use technology in a strictly regulated way. But moving to a negotiation mandate to work out the details has not yet been possible. Geopolitical tensions, mistrust among states, and a potentially flawed confidence in technological solutions hinder progress despite of the urgency of the issue, given the fast pace of development in the era of autonomic weapon systems and the preventive window for regulation closing soon. This is why Austria has been engaging actively. We hosted the Vienna Conference Humanity at the Crossroads in April this year and tabled 2 resolutions in the UN General Assembly on autonomous weapon systems that enjoyed the support of an overwhelming majority of states. The global discourse on autonomous weapon systems should not be limited to a constituency of diplomats and military experts only. The issue has broad implications for human rights, human security and development, and thus concerns all regions and all people. From an Austrian perspective, a multi-stakeholder approach on this critical issue is therefore important. We welcome the contributions of science and academia, the tech sector and industry, and broader civil society. And in this vein, I hope that today's discussion will further stimulate such a multi-stakeholder discourse. For Austria, there's urgency to finally move from discussions to negotiations on binding rules and limits on autonomous weapon system. And I look very much forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
I thank Ambassador Syste for the opening remarks. And now we move to the panel discussion. I think we have an excellent panel here. So we have another ambassador, Ernst Norman from the Netherlands. We have a former US Cyber Ambassador, Chris Painter. He will be online. We have Olga Cavalli, who is the Dean from the University of Defense from Argentina. We have Jimena Viveros, who is a member of the Commission on Responsible Artificial Intelligence in the military domain. She is from Mexico. And we have Kevin Wieland, the head of the UN office from Amnesty International. And we have Ram Mohan, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of Identity Digital and a former ICANN board member. So this is really a multi-stakeholder setting. Here we have experts from the government, from business, from civil society, and we know that since nearly 10 years in the GGE laws, there are already negotiations which has produced some minor results, have produced already a final document. So Ambassador Norman from the Netherlands is now the chair of the GGE laws, and I would propose that he starts giving us a good overview where we are in the process. And Mr. Ambassador, you have the floor, and 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you first of all for inviting me to this important panel and give me the floor and to elaborate a bit on our views on this very important topic. Now, first, to structure my intervention, I use 3 circles to discuss the risks and opportunities of AI in the international peace and security. First, the largest circle represents AI broadly, including civilian issues, a new and still developing domain that brings opportunities, but that also poses the international community with all sorts of new challenges. Within the large circle, there's a second, smaller circle. This circle is about AI in the military domain. Questions related to this circle are more specific. What are the implications of the use of AI for the way militaries operate? What kind of rules or measures do we need to make sure militaries use AI in a responsible way? Earlier this year, the Netherlands and the Republic of Korea successfully introduced a resolution on AI in the military domain in the UN First Committee. The resolution requests a report from the UN Secretary General providing states with a platform to exchange perspectives. The resolution was approved by a massive majority of 161 votes, with only 3 against and 13 abstentions. This resolution will initiate a dialogue independent of multi-stakeholder re-aim process, which will continue to serve as an incubator for ideas and perspectives from other sectors. The re-aim process was an initiative also from Korea and the Netherlands on responsible AI in the military domain. These 2 processes will complement each other, working towards inclusive discussions on AI in the military domain. And third, the final circle, contained within the second circle, is the autonomous weapon systems. Although the issue first came up in the Human Rights Council in 2013, it was referred to the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons, CCW, given its relevance to disarmament. The CCW has played a critical role in addressing emerging threats, including prohibitions and regulations on various weapon systems. The CCW then established a group of governmental experts on lethal autonomous weapon systems, the GGE laws for short, in 2016. Now, the GGE counts nowadays 127 high contracting parties. That means 127 countries, plus every other country, and relevant international NGOs can attend as observers and do also so. So one can say it's a very inclusive process. My colleague, our Dutch ambassador for disarmament, Robert Indenbos, chairs the GGE on laws, through 2026. One of the strengths of the GDE is that it has all the large military states included. This can make discussions more difficult, but I believe that when we get to agreements on regulations and prohibitions, it will be much more effective. As a final point, it remains important to note that the group is increasingly working against time. What started as a concern of the future is today an urgent pressing issue, as weapon systems capable of limited or no human intervention are rapidly being developed and deployed in modern battlefields. It falls on the international community, on states and other stakeholders to garner the political will to make progress on this issue. And the interest by the global community is evident, as shown by the multiple regional and international conferences and UN General Assembly resolutions, all of which highlight the growing global engagement. Coming back to the question, is this an Oppenheimer moment? Can we learn something from the nuclear arms race? I am very wary I'm very aware of drawing historical parallels. The challenges we face are enormous, as these types of weapon systems have the potential to transform modern warfare. But they also differ from the nuclear domain in many ways, so I would be cautious to draw such parallels. A lot of important work is happening, and we must continue to collaborate constructively to address the issue and to treat it with the urgency it demands. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ambassador, and discussion and also the question about the Oppenheimer moment. So my understanding from the Oppenheimer moment, it's also a challenge to the researchers and to the academics to be aware about their response, what they are doing. And just 2 days ago, we had the Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm, where the winner of the Nobel Prize for Physics, Britain, raised also concerns and said, you know, this can bring a moment where we are really at risk. And insofar, you know, we should make parallels which do not working, but we should be aware that in circles, and sometimes we are coming back on a higher level in a situation where we have been already. And I just was informed that meanwhile Windsurf, who was expected to give also some opening remarks, is now online. And I'm very happy, Wind, that you are able to make it. I think it's very early in the morning in the United States. Take the floor. You have the floor now. Thank you very much.
You're very kind. Thank you so much. As it happens, my day began at 1 o'clock this morning in Washington, D.C., so I've been up for a while. My previous session didn't end timely, and I thrashed around for a while before I got to this one, so I apologize for my delay. Let me just add a little bit to what has already been discussed. First of all, some of you know about an organization called the Ditchley Foundation. It's a US-UK organization, and among the various things that it convenes are discussions on important policy like this one, the concern for autonomous weapons. We spent a day and a half looking at the nuclear deterrent practices and tried to ask whether they had any, whether they would inform any of our practices with regard to cybersecurity. And the conclusion was that the two are quite different, just as the previous speaker pointed out. For one thing, proliferation has already happened. AI is essentially everywhere. And to make matters more complicated, AI is not necessarily very reliable. And my biggest worry about trying to establish policy with regard to autonomous weapons or other potentially hazardous uses of AI is that we don't yet know how to contain artificial intelligent agents to prevent them from executing functions that might turn out to be of considerable hazard. And so while we can try to establish policy and objectives to achieve that limitation, I think the previous speaker implied that there was a great deal of work to be done in the technical community to establish bounds on the behavior of these autonomous agents. So I think that we can't really succeed in making policy unless we also have the technology available to enforce it. Therefore, there's still a lot of work to be done. That's as much as I think I need to disturb you with this morning, but thank you so much for the opportunity to intervene.
Thank you very much, Vint, and I hope you can stay with us and continue the discussion, because our next speaker is also an expert in this field and is a member of various commissions. She is now the commissioner on the Global Commission on Responsible AI in the Military Domain, which is also an initiative which came out from the Netherlands. But she was involved in the Age Lab of the United Nations Secretary General Committee, and she's working with the OECD as an AI expert. And I'm very happy that we have Jimena Viveros from Mexico. Jimena, if you could comment on what we have heard already and to explain a little what we are doing in this commission.
Hello. I hope you can all hear me. Perfect. Well, first of all, I would like to thank our Austrian and Dutch friends for championing such important initiatives, and also the South Korean, which are not here, I think, but are also part of this very big international effort to put these resolutions on the table, which are very welcome. And also your work with the GG laws. So just to give like a broader spectrum, for those who are not familiar with the Global Commission on Responsible Use of AI in the Military Domain, as Wolfgang said, this was initiative created by the Netherlands and the government of South Korea. So we are a commission of I think 18 commissioners and around 40 experts. And we have a mandate to come up with some recommendations by the middle or end of next year regarding this. So also I was, as Wolfgang mentioned, part of the United Nations Secretary General's high-level advisory body on AI, where we had an issue whether or not to include the military domain in our recommendations. For those who read the report, which I hope is everyone, we did include it in the end, but it was a struggle. So the reason why it was included, I led the engagements and the consultations on the peace and security, as also I am leading the work stream on peace and security at REAIM. And the arguments that I use and the issues that I always raise are similar, but they might seem different in context. I always say that these technologies cannot only be looked through the military lens. That's why I call it the peace and security spectrum, because there are so many non-state actors that are using this, and even state actors, which are civilian, like law enforcement or border controls. And non-state actors, the immediate thought is always terrorism, but we also have organized crime and mercenaries, which are increasingly relevant in the political landscape that we're looking at right now. And it's the exact same technology that is being used. So what we need to come up with are guidelines in the development phase to have responsible innovation, because we also don't want to hinder innovation, because of course there are also good applications that can come out of AI in the peace and security domain when used responsibly, when developed responsibly. But that's the key, because when we're talking about all of these governance initiatives, we always speak about these very abstract terms: responsible AI, ethical AI, safe AI. But the problem is when we bring it down, you know, to the operator, to the developer, to the user, to the consumer, no one really knows what obligations that kind of derives. And those are the translations that we need to make, you know, kind of make it operational. And we have a huge problem, which is going to be implementation and which is going to be enforcement. That's even going to be a bigger one. So That's why we absolutely need a binding treaty, as our Secretary General and the ICRC called for 2026, with this two-tier approach, right? That is based on whether or not the systems can comply with IHL, then those would, if they cannot, then those would be forbidden, and those who can could be regulated accordingly. But this is extremely necessary. But then we also need a centralized authority that would have the mandate to do the oversight, as we do, for example, with the with the energy agency. I'm also a little bit cautious to call this the Oppenheimer moment, because AI is a very different monster than nuclear, because when, even since its origins, from the splitting of the atom, it was immediately weaponized. And there was like this whole veil of secrecy around it with the Manhattan Project and with everything that happened for years. And then, you know, with the Cold War and the arms race and everything, no one really used it. Everyone was producing it, but no one really used it because it was like a mutual assured destruction. Whereas with AI, we don't really have the conscience yet, collectively, that it will be the same. But as of right now, since its origins, it was used simultaneously in civilian and in military. So it was weaponized and non-weaponized uses at the same time. So that makes it even harder to control. And then you have open source, which makes it even harder to control. And it's cheaper, and the resources to create it and to do harm with it are so much more accessible and less traceable than, say, like a uranium plant. So that also makes it easier for non-state actors or other malicious or rogue and nefarious actors to get hold of this and to create big harm. Also, when you converge it or convert it into weapons of mass destruction, so with nuclear, chemical, or bio, but also swarm drones could have the potential of being a weapon of mass destruction in itself. And that's something that we should also keep in mind. So we have very added into the cyberspace and all of those different type of attacks on critical infrastructure, and the whole destabilization effect that AI has in the military and the peace and security domains is enormous. And a big problem that we definitely need to address and keep in mind in every single forum is the disproportionate effect that this will have on the global south. Because these weapons are not going to be used in the global north against the global north. These are normally weapons that will be affecting the global south. And the problem is there's no capacity response as of yet to counter this type of threats. And this is a big, big, big issue that we should all be mindful of. So all of these initiatives, and I mean, even when we're talking about the civilian ones, so for example, at the OECD, where we only look at civilian domains, but there's a monitoring of incidents, which I think could be very useful also for other peace and security domains, because the lack of data is also a risk. So, and we also know that the civilian data, or the data that's been collected by civilian sources, is being then used by other type of military or security agencies. So that is also a very big problem that we should all be mindful of. And so that's basically the landscape of the risks and the threats that I see as the most urgent. But I will leave it there to keep mindful of time.
Thank you, Trilena. You made a good point. Differentiation to the that the nuclear bombs were produced, but AI weapons are produced and used. It's more aware. It needs more awareness, and so that means all the discussions are taking place more or less in small expert circles. So there is the level of public awareness about this issue is relatively low. So it means much more public awareness, and that's the first discussion in an IGF on this issue. And one of the objectives of this discussion is to raise the level of awareness. And awareness leads to education. And we are have here Olga Cavalli, who is the Dean of the Defense University in Argentina. And my question to Olga is, how do you prepare the soldiers and generals of tomorrow for this new situation? Thank you, Olga.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is a very interesting question. And I like very much the perspective that our colleague from Mexico brought is what happens with the global South. Or developing economies or the global South, and I can bring some perspectives from Latin America. Latin American countries are engaged in different discussions and negotiations related with autonomous weapons. We have been active for more than 10 years in different spaces, saying that it's a concern for our countries, for our region. The challenge is always for developing economies and how we approach this technology. In general, we don't produce this technology. We use it. It's expensive to buy. And imagine from a capacity building perspective, how can you train our soldiers and our civilians? I like very much your perspective. It's not only about military issues, it's also about other uses legally or illegally of these weapons. How do you approach the technology that is so far from developing technology, how it's developed and how it's reachable from affordability perspective? So it's extremely expensive. You don't develop it. It's extremely hard to buy. How you approach this training? So we have been working from our university in different collaborations with universities from developed economies from the United States, Europe, and other countries. So we think that through collaboration in between different teaching spaces, that's the way that our countries can approach and learn about these technologies. For you to have an idea, the minister called me for this position because of my training in technology, and we opened a new career in cyber defense. We had more than 1,000 applications in 1 month. So what the authorities this morning were expressing about the need for training in cybersecurity and cyber defense is a reality in all the countries. So these new careers are highly demanded. So our challenge is, how are we going to train these people, for example, in things like autonomous weapons? So it's a huge challenge for us. So I think that a way is cooperation with other universities, with other governments. We are working on that. And our president is very keen in going to abroad and having this agreement. So I think this is the way. And at the same time, in general, we think that a global treaty could be a very useful tool, because what happens usually is that these regulations are developed in different spaces and with different focuses. And usually the global South is following up, but not perhaps so much into the development of the regulations. So a global agreement could be ideal. As usual, it's difficult to achieve. So I will stop here and I will continue contributing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. We have 2 years to go until 2026. So let's hope for the best. But I don't know why this happened, goes on and on. But
Like this? You said like this?
probably it's my mouse, so I have no idea.
I think
Yeah.
you need to hold it like this.
Okay, yeah. Capacity building was the responsibility of Chris Painter for many, many years. Chris is well known in this community. He was the first US cyber ambassador, and I hope he is online. Chris, can you hear us? And then you have the floor.
I can hear you. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, excellent. Great. Well, it's good to be here. Sadly, virtually. I wish I was there in person. But, this debate is not new. It's been made more urgent by the reality of AI. But I remember, and folks who know me well know that I'm a devotee of various cyber movies. And there is going back to even 1970, the first movie where computers took over the world, called Colossus, the Forbin Project, was exactly the scenario where the US decided because they thought it would be more rational, take emotions out of it. They put a computer in charge of the nuclear arsenal. The Soviets did the same. The two talked to each other, became self-aware, and took away all civil liberties to protect humankind from itself. So this is not a new issue. It's been dramatized over the years, and certainly in Terminator and other places like that, it's been dramatized. But I think it's been made obviously more real by the emergence of AI as a real thing. Although one, as other panelists have said, is still very unsettled in terms of exactly what the technology is, what its capabilities are, and where it's going. But as you say, Wolfgang, there is some urgency around this because it's fast evolving. I draw some parallels to the area of cyber and cybersecurity. And as many folks know, there's been debate for many years now on the cyber community about cyber attacks, cyber capabilities, cyber offensive capabilities, and defensive capabilities as moving them to an autonomous level to take the man out of the middle in some sense. And I think that's been the argument for that for many years, has been that cyber, quote, moves at the light of speed. And if your attackers can hit you, and now with artificial intelligence can hit you more often and with such lightning quickness and adaptability, you need an autonomous system to respond to them. Now, the problem with that is, like in this area generally, it's not clear. And of course, as others have said, AI spans the entire landscape of everything from cyber tools to drones to physical weapons. But in the cyber tools, and I think more generally, the escalation paths are still not really clear how these potential capabilities can be used, how they will work. And if you have AI working against AI, then you have even a greater chance of an escalation path that gets out of control. And I think that's some of the things the panelists mentioned. So that's a real concern. But even with that, I don't think we've made a lot of progress kind of cabining when you would have automated responses in cyber. That's still a live debate within countries, between countries, and I don't think we've seen a huge amount of progress. And of course, that's more lethal, or has the likelihood will be more lethal, less lethal. There may be some lethal cases than using it in more physical boundaries, as we've been talking about today. So that's one concern. Another is the cybersecurity implications of attacks on these autonomous weapon systems. Like everything else, if they're connected, they are essentially insecure at some level. If they're not connected, there's still ways to get into them. And so even leaving aside all the uncertainties of how AI works, and it's not really being as secure, as unbiased as people think it is, the cybersecurity implications, and this has been true for weapon systems more generally, has been a huge concern, because you could have an adversary breaking into these weapons, changing the artificial intelligence parameters, changing when they're used, and that again creates huge risks to peace and security. And then finally, as was pointed out by others, AI is not this unbiased system that's out there. It depends on training. It depends on how you educate it and what the parameters are. So the thought that it could be unbiased itself is a problem. So what that leads, I think, to is what are the solutions here? And as was pointed out, the GGE on these topics has been longstanding, but has not made huge amounts of progress in terms of moving toward what many people think we need, which is a treaty. I'm less optimistic that a treaty can be reached, and I base that in terms of what I've seen in other areas as well, where the geopolitical differences that we're facing are ones where I think there's unlikely to be agreement. The other issue with respect to this is because this is such a quickly evolving field, and as was pointed out by Olga and others, we still don't know the implications of how AI can be used, how it can't be used, how you can cabinet the technical, as Vince said, the technical requirements of this, that reaching a treaty in the short-term time frame of 2 years, I think, is going to be very difficult without the basic understanding of where the technology is going, and that technology is continuing to move fast. So then the question is, what kinds of things might we do? I think education is critically important. Bringing other stakeholders, as this discussion is doing, is important. I think addressing the AI divide, as I think Olga put it, with a lot of the global South, and making sure there's more capacity building. in this area, not just in this area, but attendant areas too, like cybersecurity, and AI more generally, awareness. I think calling out use cases where you actually say where we've seen these technologies being used in autonomous weapons and what the implications are, so it's made more real, is really important. And ultimately, you know, I think before you get to a treaty, kind of calling out what is good and what is bad, what norms of behavior are like we have in cyberspace, but applying them, you know, different ones, I think likely in this case, building toward a treaty eventually. I wish we could move quicker, but I have a feeling that because of that uncertainty of the technology, plus the geopolitical issues, that's going to be very difficult to do in the short term. And I think that's exacerbated by the oversight issues that one of our speakers raised, which I think are very difficult here too. So, you know, I expect we're going to have to move more incrementally, but I expect part of that is the education of both the general populace, but even the people who work within the UN and in governments about what the implications of this are more generally. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you also for putting a little bit water into the wine. Sometimes it's also good to be more realistic than too optimistic. Anyhow, you know, as you said, all stakeholders have to be involved in the development of the framework for the future, and you need technical experts. And Ron Moham, grown up in India, is for many, many years and technical expert in the ICANN community, was an ICANN board member, is now the CSO from Identity Digital. And this represents also the private sector. So there will be no autonomous weapon system without business. Ram, what's your approach?
Ernst, thank you. This is one of those things where you need a village to use the microphones. So I wanted to focus on objective information and data as a basis for policymaking. I hear discussions about how to solve problems, and I hear ideas such as guaranteeing human control with the way to achieve it by legal means. And I want to introduce some of the risks and threats that come in the evolution of software engineering, because I think we have to understand the software basis and the engineering basis before we get to the legal and policy areas. AI's own evolution means that currently known methods in software engineering of testing, quality assurance, and validation are either incomplete or insufficient. Many weapon systems in the conventional area, many weapon systems demand a model of zero defects, right? So there's a zero defect model that is expected. Now, while the concept of a zero defect AI system is appealing, it's important to recognize some of the inherent limitations that exist there. If you look at some of the key challenges, one is data quality and bias. As Chris Painter was saying, AI systems learn from the data that they are trained on, but we also know that all data is biased and all data is inherently inaccurate. And that will strongly influence the outputs from the AI systems. The second piece is algorithmic limitations. We know that current AI algorithms are susceptible to complex or ambiguous situations. And when it comes to weapon systems, that's almost all of the definition. All systems there are complex and ambiguous, and with a lot of changing parameters in there. The third component in there is unforeseen circumstances. So AI systems are likely to struggle to understand unexpected inputs or situations that deviate from their training data, right? And what we have been talking about is, in those cases, let's make sure that there is human oversight. But human oversight, when there is not an understanding of how the system, the AI system, arrived at the conclusion it did, the human oversight then defaults to merely intuition. And that may not be sufficient when we're talking about human scale problems rather than just technology issues. So when you're talking about high consequence decisions that are driven by AI, we also understand that AI systems that are learning from prior data sets, they can create novel behaviors that are neither predictable nor foreseeable. And this is exacerbated in the edge cases. One of the interesting and evolving characteristics that I have been studying is the relative ease by which you can jailbreak AI-based systems. And the jailbreaking is often a matter of expert prompt engineering. For those of you who don't know what prompt engineering, it's really the science, some call it an art, but I think it's more of a science of creating effective prompts that guide the AI model to generate desired outputs, right? So you may be able to program guidelines, laws, treaties into an AI model and say you must conform to all of these guardrails. But I think that smart prompt engineering will likely be able to overcome those kinds of guardrails that exist. So there is a great deal of evolution that is happening in that area. And good prompt engineering can help the AI system perhaps learn to build guardrails by itself. But that same kind of prompt engineering can result in not only unintended consequences, but consequences that become part of the training data set for the next cycle of the LLM. And when that is not documented or when that is not understandable, you are, I think, going to have a system that compounds an original deviation from the norm, right? So I, therefore, have some concerns about a discussion that starts with the premise that human control is a good way or is the way to help solve what is evolving here. Because you can establish strong ethical guidelines, you can create international regulations, and you can build robust safety measures. But if you look at the software engineering underneath these systems, the data validation, the fact that today's systems, it's very hard to create a zero defect model, combined with the enormous capability of smart prompt engineering to jailbreak these systems, makes me think that we have to spend quite a bit more time in research, understanding how these systems work, have a lot of simulations of those kinds of systems first, and then start to build some global frameworks and global norms of what safety should be before we can start to think about a treaty or an international agreement that makes sense. Because when the foundational principles are not fully characterized, you end up, if you start to work on law or treaties, you may find that the unintended consequences may be far greater than the good that was intended.
I think this is a very interesting additional aspect. And if I understand, I don't know.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, better? Okay, good. If I understand you, you know, there is really a problem that even if you have human control, that the underlying technology overstretches the capacity of the human who is in control. So that it's just, you know, on paper, but the reality could be move in a different direction. And I think this is an issue for a lot of civil society organizations. We have involved a number of that. There is a broad NGO called Stop Killer Robots, which is also active in the GGE laws. And Kevin, you represent Amnesty International, which has also discussed this issue for some years. So what is the civil society perspective? If you have watched to all these experts from diplomacy, technology, business, so what do you think about from a civil society perspective about this? And then we have time enough for 2 or 3 questions from the floor. Please prepare your questions.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak on behalf of Amnesty International on this important topic. It's a bit of a challenge to be, I think, maybe the 9th or 10th speaker on a panel right after lunch. So I'll try to be as concise as possible. But it's great because I think it gives me a bit of an opportunity to respond to some of the things the panelists have already said. I mean, I'll speak on behalf of Amnesty International, that's part of various coalitions, not necessarily on behalf of all civil society groups in general, but and from our perspective, I think we view the challenges and risks that come from autonomous weapon systems as imminent and as significant. And it's for that reason we believe the international community should clarify and strengthen existing international humanitarian and human rights law through a legally binding instrument. Through an instrument that would do at least 3 things. 1, would prohibit the development, production, use, and trade in systems which by their nature cannot be used with meaningful human control over the use of force. And I hear what Rohan is saying. And I think from our perspective, I think we're viewing this as, let's say, a legal standard, not necessarily a technical standard, but perhaps we can discuss that in more detail. And the prohibition would extend to systems that are designed to be triggered by the presence of humans or that use human characteristics for target profiles. So this would be the so-called anti-personnel autonomous weapon systems. So in addition to that prohibition, a regulation of the use of all other autonomous weapon systems, and then on top of that, a positive obligation to maintain meaningful human control over the use of force. Now, as some of the speakers have already mentioned, the use of autonomous weapon systems in armed conflict has been at the center of the debate, much of which has taken place in the CCW. But I think as Jimena and Olga and others have talked about, this is a debate which has dimensions that are broader than armed conflict and broader than the CCW. It's not just an issue of IHL. It's not just an issue of weapons law, but also of human rights. And so I wanted to use a bit of time to focus on the dangers in relation to the law enforcement context, where the use of force is governed by a different threshold from that which applies in armed conflict. And so from our perspective, the use of autonomous weapon systems in this context would be inherently unlawful as the international law and standards governing the use of force and policing rely on nuanced and iterative human judgment. So this goes back to something that Rohan was saying about the challenges that some of these systems have in dealing with complexity. We are talking about an exceedingly complex decision that should not be delegated. A law enforcement officer must continually assess a given situation in order to, if possible, avoid or minimize the use of force. I'm not saying that the legal determinations in the context of armed conflict are simple. What I am saying is the legal determinations in the context of a law enforcement context are exceedingly complex. And then if there is a system to be delegated, given the complexity of the issues we need to address, the system would have to be so complex as to render the system outside of meaningful human control. In other words, a machine so sophisticated to attempt to adapt to subtle environmental cues would make the machines inherently unpredictable. So then we come back to the notion of how do you evaluate that with something other than just intuition? This becomes a significant issue in terms of accountability because it would blur the lines of responsibility and accountability. It would undermine the right to remedy. And the last thing I wanted to point out is that the use of autonomous weapon systems in law enforcement would be dehumanizing. It would violate the right to dignity, undermine the principles of human rights compliant policing. And I think one of the panelists has already made the discussion, addressed the issue of bias in algorithms and systems. There are risks of systematic errors and bias in algorithms, in autonomous systems. We know, we've documented complex systems can have biased results based on biased data. For example, facial recognition can lead to profiling on ethnicity, on race, on national origin, gender, and other characteristics, which are often the basis for unlawful discrimination. So then imagine adding lethality as a component to that system. And so this is one of the reasons, just to say, stepping back, why we see value in the process at the General Assembly, because it has an aperture that's broader than that in the CCW context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. So you need a microphone to ask the question.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. So thank you for this wonderful panel. I think this is a very important issue. My name is Hiram. I'm from Encode Justice. We're a part of the Stop Killer Robots Coalition. We actually had a member go to the GGE laws meeting in Geneva, and it was very appalling to see only 2 data scientists there, like only 2 people from the technical community. And it feels like, in a lot of the rolling text and so on, a lot of the technical issues are overlooked. Diplomats expecting these systems to be controllable and reliable and predictable, which is, like kind of a dream. I think the question here is, what are kind of the bottlenecks in terms of understanding for diplomats or for, government bodies to work towards an international treaty towards like banning autonomous weapon systems or regulating autonomous weapon systems?
Ambassador, can you take the questions? Stop Killer Robots is an NGO in the GGE laws.
You can hear me? Yes. No, thank you very much for the question. And, what the very much ambition is of the chair, my colleague, is to include as many voices at the table as well. That's what he's been really actively encouraging to involve stakeholders, other organizations, and only the signatory countries and observing countries, but also academics and NGOs like Amnesty International and who are also involved in ICRC, to get a full picture and to involve everyone. At the same time, we are ambitious as well in trying to reach some agreement amongst countries. And I understand also from your contribution the limitations, but at the same time, we feel the urgent need also to be ambitious. We've been ambitious with REAIM in tabling this resolution to put it on the table. And I understand from the contributions, it's going to be difficult to reach an agreement. That's actually any agreement in this area. But if without ambition, you won't reach anything.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we have 2 questions online, and then we have another one here in the room. So could we hear the first question online?
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, hi, this is Milton Mueller from Georgia Tech. I want to go after this title again about Oppenheimer. I think I haven't heard much about one of the main problems facing AI governance, which is the belief among certain developers of AI that they have in fact put us on the path of an autonomous, not just a lethal weapon system, but an autonomous superintelligence that is capable of and might inevitably result in the destruction of humanity. And about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we had this massive panic, and we had the Future of Life Institute resolution that we should stop all development of AI. And it was those people who believed that they had passed an Oppenheimer moment, that they had discovered a power so awesome, comparable to Oppenheimer's discussion, weaponization of atomic fission. And those of us who have investigated this problem now know that this is a myth, this idea of a superintelligence that is imminent, and that this superintelligence will have the power to destroy all of humanity and all of human civilization is just not a realistic thing. So I hope that, I think your discussion of the issue of lethal autonomous weapons has been much more grounded in reality, but I do want to know if we are not headed towards this sort of revival of the myth of a superintelligence that is autonomous and capable of destroying humanity.
Yeah. First, let's take the second question, and then we try to find the person who can reply to Milton. The second question, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, Sivash, we can hear you.
So these concerns about AI are very much shared by business leaders, but there was a recent point of view that another country, another region is on the race to develop AI. And if we slow down or withdraw from this race, they will win. So we will stay on the race, continue developing without safeguards. And after we win the race, we'll worry about the safeguards. Shouldn't instead the governments and all actors get into the same room and try to achieve a solution, either at UN, ICANN, or in a conference center like Potsdam or any historical place? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have two more questions in the room. My proposal is, or three questions in the room, that we give the three questioners in the room the possibility, and then we have a final round. So you need a microphone, so the 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we close the queue, and then we have a final round among the participants, and then Ambassador Syste would make a final remark. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll make a small remark. I had a lighting session yesterday where I was actually showing an actual military warfare drone, which is being like cost $500, able to take out a $10 million tank, and this is technology which is now actually used. And the trick is, there are already lots of attempts and lots of successful attempts to implement AI on the battlefield, from swarm drones to some mothership drones connecting to the HiQ or Starlink antenna, literally glued to this mothership drone flying high in the like skies. So what I have to say is, I've been thinking a lot about how can we protect our future from AI going rogue and hostile in some way. It is not a battle between humans and humans. It's a battle between humans and some mad robots, basically. And I think we are kind of wrong way in the design of our attempts to regulate AI, because you cannot regulate the development of AI. It's super rapid, and nobody actually will agree with you and hear you out and so on. But what we could regulate is finally weapons. I mean, like, the problem of AI getting hostile is a problem of AI intentionally on his own way pulling the trigger, pulling the digital trigger of some weapon, no matter a pistol or intercontinental ballistic missile. So if we not limit AI, but if we limit by some UN treaty an ability to produce a weapon which is equipped with a digital trigger, which can be used by AI, we can protect yourself. I mean, like, it may sound like weird, but a human should only be killed by God or another human. There should not be any robot with this trigger pulling. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You need a mic. Take this one.
Hello? Yeah, can you hear me? Good. Artem Kruzhelin. I was actually a panelist on an earlier panel related to public and private sector cooperation. And my question is in a way related to this very subject. So ever since AI was a subject, there's always been an ongoing theme of the fact that legislation is consistently in a position where it's falling further and further behind, and it's very difficult to continue keeping up. How would you comment on the fact that while we are still here trying to discuss conceptual ideas around the way to control these systems, there are private sector companies such as Helsing or Anduril that are already deploying these systems in live conflicts, and they are in a way superseding the discussion just by sheer fact that they're actually using these systems already. And what do you see as a solution to these problems?
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Kunle Olarodare, and I'm the president of Internet Society Nigerian chapter, and at the same time a researcher. And interestingly, I I wrote a paper recently that I published on IEEE platform based on this subject matter, that is artificial generative intelligence terrorism. And as a matter of fact, that was what drew me into this session, because I really want to get to know more about what is being discussed. And when I listened to one of our, panelists, I mean, the perspective he threw in was so interesting to me, because I was actually looking in my own paper. I was looking at deontology and utilitarianism. Deontology in the sense that, okay, fine, let's look at how we can, look at the use of AI, right, in a moral perspective. But then, and I discovered that when I was looking at my paper, and of course, I set up like focus group of experts that speaks to those issues. I discovered that, yeah, that's going to be a bit pretty difficult, because now I have to go to the extent of define what is moral, which of course I know that all of us are not going to agree on. Then on the issue of utilitarianism, right, looking at, okay, the maximum effective use in terms of the good use. Yeah, I can say that, okay, this is a good use. Another person will say, no, that is not a good use. So I discovered that, well, there are so many perspectives. And when I had the perspective of one of our panelists that said that, okay, yeah, we now need to look at the issue of data, because all data are inherently inaccurate. That now connected to, the utilitarianism and, deontology. And I was thinking, oh, wow, I think this is just the right time for us to start talking about all these issues, because this has come and there's nothing anybody can do about it. The best thing you can do is to take it to the next level. The issue of treaty, yeah, it will definitely come. But then I think we need to start to look at how we can, okay, IGF is just a forum where we discuss all these issues. We can elicit ideas, right? But there is no binding treaty on it. So I think we should be looking at how we can take this to the next level, like maybe a plenipotentiary, right, where you have the ITUTs, the radio, the standardization and the development arm, where they discuss issues. Probably we can have, something coming out of there, so that we can take it to a level where it's going to be binding on each and every one of us. And for me, I just want to know more if, apart from Plenipot, I'm familiar with Plenipot, is there any other platform that we can, discuss the issue of, standardization when it comes to AI? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We have a final question here, and then we have a final round around the table. This time we start with Kevin, but it's not too long, too much. So can you introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi, I'm Ghayda Lindsay. I'm a local digital policy expert. My question was mostly covered, but I want to ask, we are seeing the deployment of autonomous decision-making today in war, especially in Gaza, and a lot of it is being piloted and demonstrated as like best practice around the world by these private companies. So I wonder, what is the short-term solution, something that we can do today, we can campaign for today, in order to make sure that we could limit the impact of autonomous decision making in war?
Oh. A lot of good questions, and I propose that you pick just what you want to say from with your field of expertise, Kevin, and then Jimena, and then we'll go around the table. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, maybe just a couple points. I mean, about the complexity of technology and the challenges in fully understanding it. So I'm not a technology expert, but I don't think you or any of us need to understand the technology to understand what's at stake. I am not saying that you can necessarily create a system that is subject to meaningful human control. What I am saying is that if you cannot have meaningful control over a weapon system, that is a system that should not be deployed. And another point I wanted to talk about is, I think it's been picked up by a number of questions, how to reconcile the argument that these are complex systems, we need to wait to see how they are developed, with the fact that these systems are already being deployed in multiple conflicts. And so that's absolutely why we believe that there is urgency. And what can we do? I mean, we fully support the call of the Secretary General and the ICRC to negotiate a binding treaty by 2026. So I think what you can do is campaign on that behalf, right? Make your voices heard, talk about the urgency of this situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, so I think a little bit about everything is, can you hear me? Yes, okay. The fact that, as I said, AI is a new monster, and AI in the peace and security domain is an even newer, bigger monster. So we need to reimagine what governance looks like, because the traditional models of governance that we have seen so far have proven to not be the most adequate ones. So we need obviously multidisciplinary approaches, and we need engagement also with industry, of course, to promote and to kind of guarantee that there's going to be transparency and that there's going to be some type of cooperation for enforcement, because otherwise we're just drafting dead paper, as we would say. We need definitely capacity building. As I said, capacity response, especially from the global south. And in order to make that happen, I mean, I think everyone from wherever we're standing in our trenches, we can just speak to our policymakers, demand that this is a thing so that it can become binding. Because otherwise we're just going to be stuck in the same place. And I do believe that it's very important to talk about standards, which was raised, because that's the only way that we can actually, in a measurable way, verify the type of guardrails, and also how to not override them. So this is very critical in the way forward. That's why I mean, like, we need to reimagine the way that governance for this technology needs to happen, and we need to do it very fast and very agilely, because we are way behind on where we should be. So it's terrible that these systems are being field tested already live. So there's like no other phase in between, and they're just deployed, because then we're seeing the consequences all around the world. And again, the global south is the one that's having the worst part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. We are pushed out now of the room. So Ron and Mr. Ambassador, you have just 1 minute to make a final comment. And if Chris wants to say something, fine. So probably.
Thank you, Wolfgang. I'll be very brief. We should recognize that there are no unbiased and accurate AI decisions. We need to recognize that there are dependencies, and I think that the important thing here is to build risk management frameworks that mitigate both known and unknown risks that are accelerated by machine learning systems.
Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I fully understand the frustration that we are lagging behind with the negotiations in the reality. That's, of course, a big concern for us all, but that doesn't excuse us from working hard towards an agreement on the subject. So we are fully committed as a chair of the GDE to work hard. We're happy with the informal forum in New York, and we will be, as a chair, briefing in New York, the countries and the wider New York community on the development and work of the GGE. But we will be really keep on working and trying to achieve a result in 2026 that has been given us as a task, and we feel responsible for that. So we're working towards a legally binding instrument to prohibit those autonomous weapon systems that cannot be used in accordance with international law, and to regulate the use of other autonomous weapons, which is a concept that's supported broadly by many states. And it's my hope that we can ultimately enshrine this through a new protocol in the CCW. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Wolfgang, So Wolfgang, just
Finally, and hearing especially what Ram said, is the big challenge for universities, not only from the global south, from everywhere, have a multidisciplinary perspective. This is challenging for universities because each faculty is very much focused. So hearing you, I think we have to be really have a broad understanding of technology. Thank you for inviting me.
So, and just finally, on Milton's point, what gives me some hope here is we're actually talking about use cases. We're not just talking about the specter of AI as some giant monster, but we're actually looking at how it applies to autonomous weapons. And I think I completely agree with the comment that was made about focusing on several levels, including on management frameworks, because autonomous devices are not new. We've been talking about those for 30 years, but AI adds its complexity. But a lot of people just use AI as a talisman, and they say those words, and it's supposed to mean something. I think actually getting down to brass tacks and talking about how those use cases work is important. So I don't think we're in that same loop that we were before. And then on locking people in a room and hope they come up with an agreement, I agree with Ernst that it's great to have ambition. If you don't have ambition, you don't get anything. I think it's unlikely locking people in a room is going to result in something in the short term, but it's important to have this process in it going. And then finally on capacity building, as Olga and others have said, I think that is critical. I think that's critical to awareness. It's critical to not just the global south, but more generally. I'd say the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, it's the capacity building platform, has created a working group on emerging technologies and AI, applying more to the cybersecurity context, but I think it also covers some of the aspects we talked about today. So I think that capacity building is another practical thing that we can do as we're talking about what the constraints are, what the treaties are, et cetera, what the norms even are in this area as we apply the technology. So also thank you for having me here.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And the final word comes from Ambassador Syste. Is online, or are we now pushed out of the room? So,
no, thank you very much. I would just a few sentences, I think, that summarize a bit the discussion that we had today. I think it was very good to have these various experts from various fields to show also the risk and severe consequences that unregulated autonomous weapons would have. And this time pressure is this what we call the Oppenheimer moment, and we need to keep up with the developments. We need to find regulation. I think that was clear for everyone, but we need to have very smart and targeted regulation that also keeps pace with the rapid technological development. And this is not the first area where we have rapid technological development, and we need to regulate it to a certain extent. But of course, we require a multi-stakeholder approach here. We cannot just only have diplomats and military experts in the room that is trying to regulate, but we need scientists, we need software engineers, and we need civil society to find a way to regulate autonomous weapons that is also flexible for future developments. Thank you.
Very much. It's not the end of the story. This is the start of a new beginning. Thank you.